Hello and welcome to The Late Show. Today is Monday the 9th of January 2017, so it's my first live programme of the year, so I want to wish you all a very happy new year, but sadly it's been a very tough year already for Israel because on Sunday Israel faced a terror attack in which a truck ran over 4 soldiers, 3 of them were girls, and also injuring 16. Back on Friday the 23rd of December, the United Nations Security Council passed a shocking resolution that claimed that Israeli settlements were illegal, but Israel was occupying Palestinian lands, and the most holiest site in Judaism, the Western Wall, is considered Palestinian, which is absolutely disgusting. And we've also seen that our British government and the American government are very much behind this UN security resolution. And to top this all as well, we've had a scandal in the Daily Mail that's being blown out of all proportions, attacking the Israeli embassy for so-called influencing our parliamentarians. So to discuss these very big events facing Israel in 2017, I'm joined by my good friend Michael McCann from Israel Britain Alliance, and my other good friend Stephen Jaffe from Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. So gentlemen, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you. Firstly, I'll start off with you, Michael, particularly with this UN vote. Now, it occurred just 2 days before Christmas Day and 2 days before the start of Hanukkah, when the Jewish and Christian world were like in the spirit of celebrating and leading up to Christmas. And this resolution comes out that is absolutely shocking in terms of its content towards Israel. What do you make of this UN resolution called UN Resolution 2334?
It's shocking. There's no other word to describe it. And why is it that democracies across the world, including our own, think that by continually conceding ground to the people who want to create violence and terror and incite new generations to violence and terror, why do they think that making concessions to them is going to make any difference whatsoever for the prospects of peace? It's important for people to remember just very briefly the history. United Nations Security Council Resolution 242, passed in '67, said that Israel would exchange land for peace. Since 1967, there's been a succession of incidents virtually every year, ranging from the 1972 Munich massacre to the First Intifada, the Second Intifada. Even when Israel withdrew settlements from 2005, when Hamas took over Gaza in 2006, what happens? Israelis face rocket fire from Iranian-made missiles from Hamas inside Gaza. So that is what the international community knows. That is all factually recorded. So what does the international community do? It blames Israel because there are 500,000 Jewish people living in the West Bank, or as many people would prefer to refer to, Judea and Samaria. Now, the bottom line is there's 1.4 million Arabs living in Israel. It doesn't in any way create an issue for the Israeli state. Why would 500,000 Jews living in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria make any difference to the prospects of a Palestinian state? The bottom line is, and our government needs to wake up to this, the Palestinians do not want peace. The Palestinians want violence and strife, and they're prepared to use their people as cannon fodder. And because they believe that it doesn't matter if it takes 50 years, 100 years, or 200 years, they want one state from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. That's what they believe in. And the quicker our politicians wake up to that, the better it will be.
I couldn't concur more with you. I think that's a very good analysis, so thank you for that one, Michael. And Stephen, I mean, our hearts go out to these young Israeli soldiers, these 3 young Israeli girls that have been drafted to defend the state of Israel, and then to be mowed over like we saw in Jerusalem on Sunday is terrible. And it's very reminiscent of the truck attack we saw in Berlin on the Christmas market just before Christmas, and also on Bastille Day in France, in Nice. The trucks seem to be the new weapon of terrorists.
Well, it's absolutely gut-wrenching, Simon. These were, as you said, youngsters. They were officer cadets in the Israeli army. These were people who were committed, wanted to serve their country with their lives ahead of them, and completely, 4 of them have lost their lives. I'm sure viewers will want to pray for their families, pray for those that are injured, because I think there were 13 who were hospitalized as a result of the attack, and we know some of them are seriously injured. So please have them in your prayers, and to pray also for those who are defending Jerusalem and keeping it safe for us to visit, We are blessed that we can visit the city of Jerusalem as a free and secure city. It's through the likes of those people who lost their lives yesterday that we are able to visit Jerusalem. So I'm sure I speak for all the viewers that our hearts go out to those who were caught up in this very, very heinous attack in Jerusalem yesterday.
Yeah. And we also got to give credit to the German government for showing the Israeli flag on the Nuremberg gates in Berlin in solidarity with Israel, and I wish more governments around the world would do that because of Germans' experience of dealing with the Christmas truck attack took so many German lives. So let's have a look at the latest kind of news report from CBN that looks at this horrendous attack that occurred yesterday that killed 4 Israeli soldiers.
Hamas is not claiming responsibility for the truck ramming attack, but a spokesman for Hamas did say it was a heroic act and called on other Palestinians to do the same and escalate attacks on Israelis. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says according to all the signs, the attacker was a supporter of ISIS. John Wagi brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Police call it one of the worst terror attacks in Jerusalem in more than a year.
We know that he deliberately drove that vehicle, the truck, into the group of soldiers that he saw that had just got off the bus. It was definitely a terrorist attack. It was caused intentionally, and our main emphasis is to make sure there's no further terrorist attacks here in Jerusalem today.
One video shows the driver barreling up over the curb and driving through the soldiers, then backing up at high speed in order to run over more people before authorities shot and killed him. It happened as about 200 soldiers participated in a field day.
And I was just downstairs with my group, another group of soldiers, and we just heard what's going on, and it was very frightening. Everyone just ran away and tried to find a place to hide, and that's exactly what I did.
When we arrived on scene, there were a number of victims, both trapped under the front of the truck as well as next to the truck, and we began to treat them. The situation, like all terror attacks, no matter how much you prepare, was mayhem. That is what it's like at a terror attack.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman visited the scene.
This is part of the same pattern, inspired by Islamic State, by ISIS, that we saw first in France and then in Germany, now in Jerusalem. This is part of the same ongoing battle against this global scourge of the new terrorism. We can only fight it together, but we have to fight it, and we will.
The attacker came from the eastern Jerusalem neighborhood of Jabal Mukaber, home to other terrorists in the past. Palestinians celebrated the attack in Gaza. Hamas declared the attack heroic and said it proved that Palestinians would not stop pursuing jihad. 40 Israelis and 2 Americans have now died in various terrorist attacks and vehicular assaults here since September 2015. Many fear terrorism will only increase following the UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlements in the West Bank. John Wagi, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Excellent report there by CBN. So we are live, we are interactive, so I'd love to know your views and your thoughts on the latest terrorist attack to hit Jerusalem, but also this UN vote which condemns Israeli settlements and also then describes that Jerusalem and East Jerusalem is Palestinian and does nothing to advance or help the peace process. Michael, just watching that news report there and hearing the Israeli Prime Minister speaking, he's come out and claimed that this is the first ISIS-inspired attack in Israel. Now, doesn't this now equate that the Israel struggle against terrorism is the same struggle that we face here, the United States face, Germany and France, and there's no difference between terrorism on our doorstep in our country or on the continent of Europe to that happening in Israel?
Well, the Prime Minister Netanyahu will know far more of the detail than we do, so we have to defer to his knowledge of the situation. But I'm sure, I certainly haven't, I'm sure your viewers don't, distinguish between terror, whatever it happens, whether it's happening in London, whether it's happening in Germany, whether it's happening in France, or whether it's happening in Israel. The thing that people have to recognise is that the Israeli people have been battle-hardened because they have faced these threats since their inception, since the country's rebirth in 1948. That doesn't mean to say that families are not grieving in Israel tonight. It doesn't mean to say that families are not crowded around hospital beds looking at the people who have been injured in this terrible attack. Because they're battle-hardened means they have to understand and be prepared for the threats that they face. But if a life is lost or a child is injured or maimed as a result of terrorism, well, surely to goodness people will recognise that it doesn't matter where it is. The difference is, for Israel, is that they've faced these threats for decades. But we, I'm delighted like you, that the German government showed the empathy with the Israeli people with the Star of David being shown onto one of the monuments in Berlin. And quite frankly, governments around the world should be doing more, including our own, to show that we stand with the Israeli people. Although I have to say, tying it back into UNSCR 2334, the only people that resolution helped are the people who are celebrating in the streets and giving out cake to celebrate the fact that 4 young people have been killed. It's appalling.
Absolutely. And I have to ask you from your perspective, Stephen, because you work tirelessly on behalf of the Jewish community here in terms of advocacy and reaching out to the Christian community, that Israel faces challenges that the rest of the community doesn't face. Because, you know, when we see the terror attack that we saw on Sunday with this truck attack in Jerusalem, and then we've seen similar things in Nice, and we then see the same sort of thing in the Christmas market in Berlin, there is a connection that Europe is struggling against terrorism. But when Israel faced the same threat of terrorism attacks, there isn't that same international sympathy and outpouring. And you get so many on the left-wing mainstream media saying, well, this is Israel's fault, isn't it? You know, they caused this. This is the battle that we're fighting for the truth of the situation.
And of course, you look at the BBC reporting of the incident in Jerusalem yesterday, and they will say things like, according to the Palestinian leadership, this is due to the frustration at Israel's policies. Michael, I think, put it very well. No, it's not. It's about people who want the Jews out of the Middle East, who want Israel completely wiped off the map, and Islamist state from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. That is what's motivating the terror. It's not frustration at, they'll talk about frustration at the peace process or whatever nonsense. It is a deep felt sense of the Jews have no right to be there, and that they're entitled and obliged to force them out through terror, through war, through international campaigns like BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions of Israel, to isolate and weaken Israel. So I think this is something which our media has deliberately, I think, set its, has not appreciated that, has not recognised it, and will not articulate what is actually motivating the violent attacks against Israel.
And Michael, if it wasn't for Israeli expertise and Israeli intelligence, I think the United States, Britain and Europe would be struggling to deal with this Islamist terrorist threat that we're facing today. So surely a lot more recognition of Israel's role in fighting terrorism should be notified by the British government and our media. Plus also, the other thing is that when we see attacks like this, the international community should be condemning the Palestinians who are carrying out this terrorist attack, rather than rewarding them and say, yes, you have a green light, go and commit as many terrorist attacks as you like against Israel, because we don't care.
Well, being a friend is a two-way street, Simon. Friends help each other, they do things for each other, and we have a friend in Israel because we know that whether it be security or other forms of fighting terrorism, that Israel, because of its neighbourhood in which it lives, has to be on top of its game to ensure that it protects its citizens from the dangers that it faces from its neighbours. And our government's first responsibility is to protect us as citizens as well. You know, if there was rockets being fired into London, into Glasgow, into Belfast or Cardiff, then our government would take whatever action was necessary to protect us. That's what the Israeli government do for their citizens. And then, when the Israeli government innovate and find new ways of protecting us, they export that technology and that support, not only in terms of terror and for security, but life-saving techniques. Israel has invented a new plasma where we no longer need to be stitched up, glued together, or have staples inserted. It's a plasma which actually rejuvenates the skin and protects a wound while it's healing. So all these innovations come from Israel, but it's a two-way street. And quite frankly, the Israelis have been poorly served by the conduct of democracies across the world, repaying the friendship they owe to Israel. And that should start now. A firm condemnation of terrorism, just as if it was happening in any street in the United Kingdom or in Northern Ireland, or any street in the United States. That has to happen. And friendship has to become a true two-way street, rather than the way it looks just at the moment, which is we'll take from Israel when it suits us, and then we'll disregard it when it suits us as well.
Yeah. So I got a couple of emails already. This one says, thanks for your programme, Simon. Israel needs to get rid of all the Arabs whose homeland is Arabia and the Gulf, and that's from John. Well, that's the Palestinian position, but that's not Israel's position. And there are many Christian Arabs living in Israel, including Muslim Arabs as well, where they're given full citizenships and full rights. So, you know, that's the difference between Israel and her neighbours. This one says, sorry, just getting this one up. This one says, I'm so ashamed. And got one more, and this one says, I don't understand why Britain voted for the resolution. Wasn't it reported that our Prime Minister spoke against it, so how come it was voted for? We as a nation are not made aware of what's going on and what it entails. Praying for the peace of Jerusalem and for God's chosen people. God bless. And that's Glenda Barker. So thank you very much for that one. Yeah, I'm going to bring you on to this one, because I think this latest terrorist attack in Jerusalem ties in, because the international community is effectively given a green light for Palestinian terrorism against Israel through passing this shocking UN resolution 2334 that condemns Jewish settlements as if they're the biggest obstacle to peace in the Middle East, and also the fact that they describe now that East Jerusalem, including the Old City and the Western Wall, is Palestinian territory and Israel's occupying, despite the fact that the Jewish people have a heritage that goes back thousands of years before the time of David, even the time of Isaac, to that very special piece of real estate.
Well, actually, yesterday, Simon, was a fast day in the Jewish tradition, and we were commemorating the commencement of the siege of Jerusalem, not the Roman siege, but actually 500 years before the Babylonian siege. That's how far back the Jewish connection to Jerusalem goes, and the Jewish narrative and the Jewish memory. But one thing that I've noticed about the international community's reaction to the terror attack in Jerusalem is they've said, both the United Nations Security Council have condemned it, all the countries that were behind the resolution and signed it condemned the terrorist attack, and they said there was no justification for that attack. And yet these are the same countries which have signed up to a resolution which says East Jerusalem, all of East Jerusalem, is occupied Palestinian territory, that Israel has no right to be there, that there's no legal justification for Israel to be there, and yet they're saying there's no justification for the terror attack. Through their carelessness, through their malevolence even, they are giving justification for the terror attack that we saw in Jerusalem yesterday, and we really have to stand up against what I think is rank hypocrisy.
Yep, and let's remind ourselves of what happened back in December when the United Nations Security Council voted against, stated that Jewish settlements were illegal and Israel's in occupation of Palestinian lands, and has to withdraw essentially to the armistice lines, which are unsecure borders of 1967.
Israel has summoned diplomats of 10 nations which voted for last week's UN resolution condemning Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Prime Minister Netanyahu will also meet with US Ambassador Shapiro. Netanyahu previously said he would reassess ties with the UN after the vote, but on Sunday took aim at the US specifically. He reaffirmed his position at a cabinet meeting.
Going there would make negotiations harder and drive peace further away. And as I told John Kerry on Thursday, friends don't take friends to the Security Council. I'm encouraged by the statements of our friends in the United States, Republicans and Democrats alike. They understand that the Western Wall isn't occupied territory.
Calling diplomats on Christmas Day is highly unusual and underlines how seriously Israel are taking what one official called a conspiracy by the US. The White House has denied the allegation. Netanyahu says his government cannot and will not accept the resolution.
And I've got a few more emails, and this one says, just want to thank the Jewish people for being a barricade for the West. They are the ones that are stopping more terrorist attacks in Europe. If Israel went, there'll be more terrorism would be on the streets of England. So thank you. I completely agree with this one. This one say the tragedy is truth is no longer recognisable, and those who stand for Israel's right to the land are seen as supporters of genocide. This is compounded by a church that's forgotten that Jesus was a Jew, and that's from Len. You're completely right there, Len. This one says Mrs. May should hang her head in shame for not vetoing this resolution. She should remember Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. God bless Israel, and that's from Gia. So thank you for that one, Gia. I have to tell you, over the Christmas break, I just had a bit of a break, and occasionally looked at my emails. I saw a few of these news stories coming in regarding this UN security vote. I thought I can wait a few days, just relax, and then go back and have a look at it. But it wasn't until I actually started to research this and look into it that I realised the magnitude of this UN resolution. But the fact that it was the British government and the British Foreign Office in particular in cahoots with the US administration to come up with this resolution to condemn Israel, but then to get the likes of New Zealand and Senegal to do their dirty work. Isn't this shameful on behalf of the British government, and who is directly responsible on behalf of the British government for this UN resolution? Because friends, and Britain is a friend of Israel, shouldn't send other friends to the Security Council.
Well, the buck stops with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, see, I've been involved in politics. I understand how the Foreign Office works. It attempts to create this situation where it can compartmentalise itself and act as if it's an adjunct to government. It's part of the government. British foreign policy is important, and the Prime Minister is responsible for that, as well as every other government department. The buck stops with the Prime Minister. But not only has this given the Palestinians the legitimate ability now to demand preconditions before any talks. Forget about refugees, forget about Israel's security, forget about borders, land swaps and all the rest of it. This gives them the legitimate right to refuse to negotiate because the UN said that Israel has to deal with the settlements first. And it's an act, in my opinion, the word I would use is cowardice, because we got New Zealand. Now, I'm sure we've got friends and relations and other people we know in New Zealand. Their government were used as the pawn.
Absolutely.
Because behind New Zealand were all these faceless bureaucrats in the Foreign Office drafting the words very poorly, particularly when they didn't criticise the Palestinians for inciting and supporting violence, as we have seen in the last 24 hours when they have been celebrating the deaths and injuries of young people being run over by a truck by a terrorist. So that's the people we have supported. And it worries me greatly. But many people have asked me this question, Simon, but why did he do it? Let me tell you why. People may remember a dictator called Pol Pot, who gave this line. It said, "History begins now." Everything before didn't take place. And that is what UNSCR 234 is designed to do. That history begins with it. Forget everything beforehand. Forget 242, which said exchange land for peace. History begins with 2334. And if you go back to the Palestinian psyche, who believe that it doesn't matter if it's a 50, 100, 150 years, they'll use their people as cannon fodder till they get what they want. In 150 years' time, they'll be quoting 2334. They won't be quoting 242. And that's the purpose of it. And our government has played right into the hands of terrorism, which means what suffers democracy and the ability to get round the negotiation table and solve this so that nobody on either side can get hurt or killed again. And that's what our government has sacrificed.
And, I mean, Stephen, when we're actually looking at this UN resolution vote, I mean, for the British government to actually, and British diplomats to, according to the Times of Israel, to actually help, and the Jewish Chronicle and the Jewish News have also quoted the same sort of story. So, that's where I get my source and information from. I think it's widely known now. But the British government surely is actually very short-sighted to know that Donald Trump is going to be America's next president. He's going to be inaugurated on the 20th of November. It's a new pro-Israel administration that's coming in. Britain needs the United States more than ever now because we voted out of the European Union. And why antagonise the new incoming administration over this vote?
Well, I think that's a very interesting analysis from the UK's own self-interest. I think we saw the Prime Minister tried desperately to retrieve the situation in America when she condemned the speech by John Kerry, aspects of that speech, and I think she was clearly looking perhaps to the incoming administration to say, yes, we don't want to offend Donald Trump before he comes in. But I think it's one of the great motivations behind this resolution is that they want to push this through before Donald Trump is president to, as Michael has said, change the entire framework of the international position to really limit Donald Trump and what he can do as president. I think that's a bit short-sighted from the United Nations point of view, because I should imagine the United States is one of the biggest sponsors of the United Nations. The HQ is in New York, after all, and I think the United Nations might find itself with a bit of a comeuppance due to its haste and its kind of malevolent situation where they're pushing this through before he becomes president. I think that from even the UN's perspective, not good politics.
Yeah, I'm just going to read out a few of your emails, so thank you for writing them in. This one says, I'm so ashamed of a government voting the way they did. Does it show the Prime Minister standing on Israel? And that's Jackson. I don't think it does, actually. This one says, good evening, gentlemen. The UN decision on the West Bank and the response from the British government, though shocking, is not surprising. Britain has never been supportive of Israel or the Jews in the UN. Although America was supportive since Obama came on the scene, this appears to have changed. Obama, being a Muslim sympathizer yet proclaiming America's support for Israel, is speaking with a forked tongue, and his actions have demonstrated. Britain, we know, is also as deceitful, as with one breath they can say they support Israel and the Jews, but in fact don't. The UN and the New World Order are complicit with the Muslim kings in their plans to take over the world, though taking over control of all the oil and the gas in the region, so control the world through money and oil. And that's some blessings from Brian. Brian makes an interesting point, and that is that previous US administrations have always protected Israel at the UN, particularly in the UN Security Council, and that President Obama personally went against a promise that he made to the Israeli Prime Minister in 2011, Bibi Netanyahu, in which he says, Israel, I'll have your back and I'll protect you in the UN. Surely this now shows that President Obama is no friend of Israel.
Well, I don't think you can put any other interpretation on it. I think that when the backstairs deals took place, when America asked Britain, if we were to believe all the news accounts, that they were to do the dirty work and speak to New Zealand and get the words. And the words were to and thrown behind the scenes till President Obama agreed them. And agreed them so that he could abstain. This is where the cowardice element comes in, because if you believe in something, vote for it. The diplomacy is important, and sometimes you have to hold back and say a bit more at different times in order to get what you want to achieve. But this is, this is entirely different. This is just saying one thing and doing something completely different. And I don't think that's diplomacy. I just think that's shocking, and it's actually deceitful. In terms of President Obama's relationship with Israel, we knew it was going downhill. The real personal relationship with Bibi, ever since Bibi spoke to Congress and created all those difficulties, was making it more and more difficult. But you know something? Obama's had 8 years in the White House. It's coming to the end. And in his last month, he decides, after not resolving any of these issues, he decides that he's going to have one final stab in it.